Now, how can we change our future course? Before I give an outline of how we go about it, we need to understand one concept, namely that every system has a conceptual reality and has a physical reality. Let me give you a simple example. This building here was conceived as an idea by somebody. And then there were plans made to design the building before it actually was built in physical reality exactly according to those plans. Now, every physical reality we see, every business we see, every system we see has been conceived on the basis of a field of ideas, if that's how we want to call it. Conceptual reality is a field of ideas, and that field of ideas carries on driving reality. Why did we throw trillions at the finance crisis? Because of that field of conceptual reality that we have about how financial systems work or should work. So, conceptual reality informs physical reality. If our conceptual reality is wrong, our physical reality will be wrong. If the architect makes a calculation error in the design of a building, it will collapse. Because conceptual reality informs, puts form into physical reality. If the current situation is undesirable, it indicates that there's a need for changing conceptual reality. In other words, we need to redesign conceptual reality. If we realize that we have problems with all our systems, health systems, education systems, infrastructure, whatever, it's time that we redesign the system. Now, as a management consultant, I'm always very amused when I'm confronted with all these problems in an organization, and I say, you know what? Take a week out. Do an ideal design. And everybody throws up their arms in horror. We can't do this. We haven't got time. So we have to fix the problems. Now, what we are doing in fixing the problems, we are throwing money, energy, and physical material stuff at the existing system in the hope it gets better. But it is a scramble because conceptual reality is not correct. Now, the truth is, it doesn't cost much money to rethink. It doesn't take much time to rethink. How long does it take you to get a new idea for your new house? How long does it take to have the plan made? How much does it cost? Relatively little. How much does it cost when we are starting to build the house? How much does it cost to fiddle around with an existing building and change it because we didn't like the plan, we didn't think beforehand? We have all the time and all the resources in the world to fiddle with physical reality, and we have no time to take out to do a proper, ideal design of conceptual reality so that we are informed to have new strategies arising that could change and inform our current reality differently. When we redesign conceptual reality, we redesign and transform the system. We only have transformation of a system if we have a change in conceptual reality. Everything else is cosmetic. And this is where that ethos sits that Michael has been talking about yesterday. Ethos is one part of conceptual reality, our strategic plan, our designs, etc. Now let's go back to our future. What has the conceptual reality to do with it? We have a conceptual reality in the current situation, and what we do in ideal redesign, in creating an ideal future, we are changing conceptual reality, and when we have done that, we can backcast from there to the current situation and decide what do we need to do now? How do we need to change our actions instead of going this way to start moving ourselves towards the ideal design. So the redesign of conceptual reality gives us the ideal future. What do we mean by ideal? Maybe I should say a word or two about that. If you go into the dictionary, ideal means something you can't achieve. Why is it useful to have something we can't achieve? Well, because it carries on inspiring us forever. We can carry on approximating. We can formulate goals along the way. One of my favorite vision statements is the Audi one, Vorsprung durch Technik, a leap ahead through technology. If you have a vision like that, that's 100 years from now relevant, isn't it? You can have a temporary advantage as a result of technology, but as soon as you've got it, the competition catches up. You have to find the next wave of technological Vorsprung in order to stay ahead of the game. So we need high, lofty ideals. I loved it when yesterday Andre so casually, amongst all these figures, brought in the beauty, the plenty, the truth, and some of those ideals. They are really lofty, and they should be driving our design. Of course, it would mean that we have to put our heads around it. What does truth or beauty mean for us? And that is where, of course, the ideal design comes in. The ideal future represents a different higher order logic. What I mean by that is that if I take the disease as an analogy, there are hundreds of diseases. But to create health only needs about 8, 9, 10 strategies. Correct diet, correct exercise, emotional well-being, supplementation, prevention of specific diseases, hygiene, and that's about it. If we are following those 10 strategies, we are creating health, and it wipes out or it prevents virtually hundreds of diseases. I have normally the same experience in an organization as a consultant when we surface all the problems that are there, and we have these walls full of problems, and everybody gets very depressed. I said, don't worry. There are about 10 strategies that we need to introduce in that organization, and if we're doing it, we are wiping out all these hundreds of diseases in the organization. And the same is true in society. You have to believe me, I have experienced it often in a consulting situation. As soon as you will do those exercises yourself, you will also realize the same truth. It is a higher order logic. By the way, Einstein also said something along these lines. He said, you can't solve a problem with the thinking that gave rise to it. So you have to transport yourself into a different space, that of a higher order logic. Once we've got the ideal, we can backcast strategies from the ideal future. Once we know where we want to go, we can say, all right, in order to get there, that's what we have to do. Before we don't know where we go, we can't do that. Acting according to the new strategies brings about a gradual improvement of the system towards new and more desirable outcomes. In other words, once we've got clear strategies, once we have translated those into action plans, then step by step we are moving away from an undesirable into a more desirable future. And the problem gets dissolved. We don't solve the problem, we dissolve it. As you design strategies how to make your marriage happy and start step by step introducing those into your married life, your unhappy marriage gradually disappears and you will be happy. As I am working more towards health, my disease gradually dissolves. As we transform an organization step by step towards a new ideal, our current problems dissolve. They just disappear. We don't need to focus on them. So in summary, the future is created by default or design. Default means we carry on by a habit, current future thinking, current strategies because we don't know better, more of the same. Or we deliberately design an ideal future. Either way, it's our responsibility. If we don't act differently, It's our fault, and if we do act differently, we are responsible. We cannot avoid being responsible. And as a system thinker, I know a very important change management principle here, which says whenever you come into an organization and you do an ideal design, somebody in the audience would say, you know, Elisabeth, can't be done. I say, why not? So-and-so has done it, there they do it. No, you know, you don't understand our organization. Here it will never fly. It used to make me very upset. Now I smile because I know the change management principle which says in the short term, systems resist change. And the reason for that is the momentum. Because the current momentum is so strong, you cannot see beyond what's on the next step. And it's that resistance. So there is no change without resistance. If you're a change manager, then you know as soon as you try a change, you will get resistance. There is no way you can avoid that. But the second truth is that I know as a systemic change manager, in the long term, systems change radically. Radically. Why? Because the world moves on and the world changes. Now, one of my little exercises nowadays is if I get that resistance to a change, I will ask who in the audience here is longer than 10 years in the organization. There's always somebody. I said, well, imagine I would have come 10 years ago as a management consultant into your organization and I'm proposing to do what you are actually doing at the moment in your organization. What would you have told me? Not in a million years. In the short term, can't be changed. Everybody thinks. In the long term, things change radically. But now, if we don't have an ideal vision that guides the change into a better direction, then we are trapped by those kind of trends that we saw yesterday. How do we redesign the future? In summary, and I'm going a little bit more detail through each one, we need to choose a design framework. Then we need to analyze the current situation and the current future. We need to create an ideal design, generate alignment around the design because we need to have everybody, all the stakeholders along, otherwise we can't implement the design. We need to make an implementation plan, implement, and then monitor the results, and if necessary, change. Okay, let's start with the framework. This is one of the biggest challenges we have got. That whenever we have public debate, public issues, we don't have appropriate frameworks. Now, the one I'm introducing to you here is a framework which I think is very useful in a public environment. I wouldn't use it in an organizational transformation situation. There are other frameworks. We know from system thinking that systems are hierarchically organized in the sense of a containing hierarchy. The planet contains societies, societies, institutions, organizations, groups, individuals. Individuals contain cells, cells, molecules, atoms, and so on. Now, if we are starting to think in terms of levels, because those represent levels, we immediately get a bigger or better perspective. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to the debate which we had a few years ago. What causes AIDS? Now, didn't that rock the nation for I don't know how many months in very useless debates? On the one hand, there were the doctors shouting, the HIV virus is what causes AIDS. Well, it's true, the virus has to enter at the level of the individual by means of needles, blood, or sexual intercourse. And in the mother-child transmission, we have a transfer on the cellular level. So far, so good. But if I'm a president of a country, then I'm asking myself, how come that in my country, 20% or whatever the figure is now, or 12% of the population are HIV infected, and in Europe or some other regions, 0.something%. Is that the virus? Of course not. It's co-producing factors that operate at all areas of society that facilitate or co-produce that the virus is entering the body. Is poverty such a co-producing factor? Of course it is. So if you're having a framework like that, the debate is over in 5 minutes. And we can immediately look for appropriate strategies at each level to make sure that we are dealing with those cofactors so that the virus is not entering the body. In system thinking, we say there is a necessary cause. You won't get AIDS unless the virus enters your body, but it's not sufficient. You need cofactors that the virus enters your body. So if you have proper frameworks, we immediately create clarity in our debates. Now, another part of that framework is that we have levels and dimensions. Psychological, cultural, economic, political, technological, ecological, physical, and so on. And there are sub-dimensions. So if you're looking at culture, it's religion, ethics, aesthetics, the art, science, and so on. Now let me give you a case study. And I want to read it. It comes from a journal I'm keeping sort of most days of the week when I have time, and where I'm noting my thoughts. And that happened after a debate. I don't know if it was CNN or BBC. It was sometimes in 2006 or 2007, I'm not sure about, where several peace laureates participated to debate about what causes violence in society and what we should do about it. Now, the participants were the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Tutu, Ramos Horta from East Timor, Betty Williams, who got the Peace Prize for promoting peace in Ireland. I noted it was a typical disjointed debate where a statement made by one participant is countered by another statement with interspersed interruptions and provocations by a hard talk-style facilitator. For example, Archbishop Tutu highlighted the role of poverty in violent conflicts, which we heard yesterday a lot about as well in some of the talks, whereupon Jose Ramos Horta from East Timor countered that it is not the poor who are violent, but that they're incited by ideology-driven radicals and that organized crime is involved and that these actors are not poor. The Dalai Lama then emphasized anger in individuals and anger in communities, whereupon Betty Williams countered that it is state terror, like the bombing of Iraq, that is causing all the violence we've got in the world, and she got a standing ovation for that. So obviously it was her constituency who was there. To which Ramos Horta responded that sometimes international intervention is justified if it prevents genocide or ends violence. He also said that in each case, the international community needs to consider this very carefully because the outcomes are never predictable. The facilitator then asked him, are you actually saying that you're supporting the bombing of the Americans in Iraq? So Mr. Horta said that the intervention differs from case to case, and he can't say. She said, I want a clear yes or no. He said, I can't say. So you're a fence sitter, she snaps. At the end of the debate, we had learned nothing that we did not know before, and I found myself being very despondent about the aggressiveness of the debate, that no answers were forthcoming, and that we didn't even cover all the causes or the major causes of violence. It was a conflictual debate about conflict, which was all the more disheartening that it involved 4 Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Had the facilitator had the web of the biomatrix on the screen, the different arguments could have been plotted in their appropriate boxes and then also blank spaces explored. The Dalai Lama, Archbishop Tutu, Hortes, Betty Williams, Hortes. Are they right? Of course, each one is right in their box. To try and talk against each other across levels and dimensions is meaningless. And what is most noted here is all the blank spaces. We haven't got the whole picture yet. Now, if the facilitator would really have been systemic, she would have said, well, now we have some of the boxes, and bearing in mind that there's still some unexplored boxes, but let's go for the solution. The logic of the problem here is not the logic of the solution. And we go back and ask Archbishop Tutu, the Dalai Lama, what do you suggest we should be doing in those areas? And whatever they say then gives us an answer that fits in one box. It doesn't fit the whole problem. And this is another thing of our worldview. We are always saying, and I often encounter it when I talk, and they say, so what would you do, Elisabeth, about poverty? I say, I don't know. All I know is I have a better framework, and I can facilitate a better solution generation. But the answer to those things lie collectively in all of us. None of us has ever the answer, and that is a completely different approach to our problem solving than what we are normally used to. So really, we need a multi-level, multi-dimensional analysis of the current situation. We need multi-level, multi-dimensional designs. Then we need to align stakeholders around the design. So say we have a design, our planning commission comes up with some proposed designs. What they need to do is they need to get our support, alignment, and our input. How does one do it? This is a case study that happened in Paris in the 70s, where a redesign of Paris, an urban renewal strategy, was necessary. And because of political situations that time, the left not sitting around the table with the right, no design could be made. So they had a bunch of 7 system thinkers who took the lead, sat around the table, made a design for Paris. Whom did they represent? Nobody. They were just creative people. And they came up with the design, and then they explored the different stakeholders that had a stake in the design. And they embarked on a process of asking them, what do you think about the design? And they co-designed with them. And the truth is that if this is maybe the Chamber of Commerce, they look at the design from a commercial point of view. They don't make any suggestions about art. They just make sure that we co-design in the interest of commerce. If this is the Arts Council, we do it in the context of art, and so on. So it's a function-specific thing. The whole process took 2 years, and the design was unanimously accepted. Now, the importance here is it's not about the design. If 7 other people would have sat around the table and made a design, Paris would look different today. It's about the process of engaging in the design, of changing our mindsets in the course of debating it. Now, yesterday, somebody talked about the necessity of having a national conversation. Another issue was that our government is doing things without a debate of stakeholders. So we need these kind of things. But if we don't have an ideal design beforehand, we can't have a meaningful conversation. It needs to be focused. Somebody mentioned the importance of dialogue. Dialogue per se doesn't get you to an answer. But if dialogue as a method is used in the context of a framework and a specific issue, it's a very powerful method. If we are dialoguing on the basis of a design and say, we don't like this, we want to change that, it's meaningful. But if you're sitting in the room and now let's dialogue about the future, we get nowhere. We must say, future of what? In what context, what about? So aligning stakeholders involves design iterations, changes of design, the conversation. Having the design, we need an implementation plan. Let me give you an example. Outcomes-based education, an ideal design. I don't want to get involved in the debate if it's appropriate design for South Africa or not, but outcomes-based education per se is a good design. What went wrong? The implementation plan wasn't made. The plan was dropped on teachers' desks and said, do it. They couldn't. There was no redesigned curriculum. There were no new school books. Teachers weren't trained, administration systems, government systems, support systems weren't there. Now, how do we do that? We would have had a project plan, an implementation plan. We would have had to say, well, what do we need to do first? Well, first we must redesign the curriculum before we can write new school books and before we can train teachers. Every project manager tells you that. That's not rocket science. How long does it take to change the curriculum? Maybe 2 years. Then how many years does it take to retrain 350,000 teachers? First we have to have a pilot for a year maybe. Then we have to train the trainers, and then it takes a few years to train the teachers. So we can add all that up and know how many years it takes, maybe 10 years, roughly, to change a big system like that. Well, Curriculum 2000 was the first one. Now we are on, is it complete now, Curriculum 2008 or 9? Because it takes so long, but in the meantime, we have nearly destroyed the system. Other case study. Primary health care, an excellent design for our health care. What has happened there? In order to create primary health care, the government has transferred money from one year to the other, from secondary and tertiary health care to primary health care. We didn't have a health care curriculum yet at universities. I was facilitating one at UCT. We didn't have the first student enrolled, let alone the first primary health care practitioner done. There was no clinic built, nothing. The provinces set on billions of rand. The newspapers wrote, we must change the politicians, there are the people dying, and the provinces sit on the money. And there was a debate, should we close down Hurzki Hospital or Tigerberg Hospital, because they now had no money. With one single incompetent implementation, we destroyed a system. We closed down secondary hospitals which cannot be opened again. Had we waited for a few years and carried on, and that is an important change principle, until you're doing something new here, you carry on as usual, business as usual. And as we would have built clinic after clinic after clinic, we would have transferred the money from the secondary to the primary healthcare, and we would have had a smooth transition. We would have a perfect healthcare system now. It can't be done without an implementation plan. A design is not a plan. So an implementation plan gives us the long-term strategic plan, the annual strategic plan, and the operational plan. And here we act bit by bit. And that is what moves us away from the current to the ideal future.